Thank you all so much for joining us today. My name is Jim Neighbors. I'm on the faculty in the Department of English, and I'm one of the coordinators of Wofford's African and African American Studies program. Today's session, Moving Forward, Honoring Memory by Renaming and Removing White Supremacy, follows Tuesday's teach-in, How Did We Get Here? Monuments, Memory, and Memorials, which are the latest in a series of anti-racism teach-ins put on by the Office of Diversity and Inclusion and the Anti-Racism Action Team. Teach-ins have included Speaking Truth to Power, which examined the context and history behind the murders of Rayshard Brooks, George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, Sandra Bland, and so many others. And the Anti-Racist Toolkit, which demonstrated ways to develop anti-racist practices. And Black Lives Matter and Say Her Name, social media as a political tool, and tweets, DMs, and hashtags, social media for social change, which addressed online social activism movements. Upcoming anti-racism teach-ins include creating anti-racist classrooms and protest movements in professional sports. Please follow the Office of Diversity and Inclusion's social media accounts for information about our next teach-ins on the 11th and 13th of August on anti-racist classrooms. If you've not been able to attend the teach-ins live, you can access those recordings on the Wofford College YouTube channel. So we worked Tuesday on the idea of how a nation remembers its past is central to the development of its most fundamental values. Our panelists helped us better understand the significance of a country whose memorial landscape is dominated by monuments to white supremacy. Today's teach-in is dedicated to the activism required to remove and rename these memorials, especially as they constitute the landscapes of our colleges and universities. Wofford, for example, is an institution founded by someone who owned enslaved Africans, and it has 3 buildings named after 3 others who also owned enslaved Africans. At the end of June, a coalition of students called the Wofford Anti-Racism Coalition released a document that includes a list of grievances Black students and other students of color want addressed, and a list of corresponding demands based on those grievances. They presented their grievances and demands 5 weeks ago to Wofford President Naif Samhat. One of their grievances expresses their concern about Wofford's continuing decision to retain the names on its campus buildings of those who owned human beings. We are honored and humbled today by the presence of one of the members of the Wofford Anti-Racism Coalition, Destiny Shippey, who has agreed to join us to read the coalition's grievance and its corresponding demand. Destiny.
Thank you, Dr. Neighbors. So we feel that it's inappropriate to have buildings on campus named after Carlisle, Shipp, and Whiteman, who all owned enslaved people. It is unacceptable and disrespectful to force students to reside in buildings named after people who did not believe in the humanity of Black people. Therefore, we demand that the names of offensively named buildings, Carlisle, Shipp, and Whiteman, be changed. We suggest that the college honor 3 alumni of color, Albert Gray, Douglas Jones, and Janice B. Means.
Thank you, Destiny. On July 9th, partly responding to the Student Coalition's demands, as well as content posted by hundreds of Wofford alums, former faculty and staff, current students, faculty, and staff on a Black at Wofford Instagram account, President Samhat released a comprehensive new diversity vision plan to address the history of racial tension at Wofford. The president's plan, called A Vision for Wofford in the World, includes a list of action steps to help Wofford become, quote, a diverse, welcoming, and inclusive home to all, unquote. None of the items on the president's plan includes renaming buildings named after former slaveholders. Today's panel consists of scholars and activists who have participated in or influenced successful renaming projects at colleges and universities in our region. Furman University's Seeking Abram project takes on Furman's white supremacist history in multiple ways, which include renaming buildings and streets, posting memorials around campus that honor Black and other people of color, and funding research and programming designed to institutionalize anti-racism. And at Clemson University, the Board of Trustees responded to years of collective action to rename 2 buildings named after arch racists. 2 of our panelists today worked on those renaming projects. Our third panelist has helped to change the national narrative on the significance of memorials. His scholarship has informed and motivated renaming efforts at institutions across the country. We aim today to build upon Tuesday's teach-in, which helped us understand the history and purpose of monuments to white supremacy by providing specific examples of how and why buildings were renamed on campuses with white supremacist histories. Our panelists will each speak for about 10 minutes, after which we will ask them a question that we've taken from those asked by attendees in the registration forms. We'll then transition into a question and answer portion of the program. During today's teach-in, you may send questions to our host, Nadia, through the chat feature in our call. We will make every effort to answer as many questions as possible. After this program is finished at 2 p.m., attendees will have the option to participate in breakout sessions with others in attendance today. Each breakout session will be hosted by a member of the Anti-Racism Action Team. And please note that while the panel discussion and question and answer portion of this teach-in is being recorded, the breakout sessions will not. Additionally, any attendee who engages in disrespectful, harassing, or racist behavior will be removed from the session. Okay, so our first panelist today, Derek H. Alderman, is a professor of geography and the Betty Lynn Hendrickson Professor of Social Science at the University of Tennessee. His research and teaching are focused on public commemoration, heritage landscapes, and critical place naming studies, often in the context of race, memory work, and civil rights in the southeastern United States. Alderman is a past president of the American Association of Geographers and the founder and co-coordinator of Tourism Reset, a publicly engaged academic initiative that advocates for more socially just representations of African American histories and identities within the travel industry and the wider society. Welcome, Professor Alderman. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
All right, here's the question. As we learned from Tuesday's teach-in, and as your research has demonstrated, the landscape of memorials a country or institution produces has a tremendous effect on the individuals who occupy those spaces. How a college or university memorializes itself helps to determine the character or identity of that institution, which in turn has a powerful shaping effect on the lived experience of those studying, living, and working there. Would you walk us through an argument that reflects your work with Reset, but is located on a college campus? How would a more just representation of Black histories and identities develop on campus?
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Neighbors. And what I'd like to do now, if I can, because PowerPoint is almost part of what my extension of my own body. So I'm going to try to present a few ideas just through PowerPoint. All right, I hope everybody can see that. All right, very good. I first want to say thank you to all the people involved in this initiative, and thank you to the Walford community for having me. I'm honored and flattered to be here, honored and flattered to be on the panel with my colleagues. And so I really admire what's going on at Walford. Had a great discussion with Destiny and Margaret a couple of days ago, and just found that to be exhilarating. And I really just would encourage you to keep pushing for social change. I also need to acknowledge my own positionality as a white Southern male and the impossibility that I can ever fully understand what it's like to live with and against racism. At no point in this discussion do I try to talk for those marginalized communities, but try to speak in solidarity. And I will say that a lot of the things that I'm going to discuss are things that I have learned by working with or observing communities of color, basically in the trenches, working for greater justice. I'd like to begin my discussion with some foundational ideas, which may be the extent of stating the obvious, but I think they're pretty important for us thinking about how do you actually carry out the mechanics of a more just representation on any campus. One of those is the fact that despite, I think, some of the comments made by opponents that somehow petitions to rename places that these struggles over symbols are somehow new, they're revolutionary, they're out of bounds. The truth is, there is a long history of using place names as tools of racism and anti-racism. We don't have the time here to go into that history, but I think I want you to come across with the idea that when we talk about this, this is, I think, revolutionary in the sense of trying to reconstruct the institution of colleges and universities, but it is relying upon a histories of activism that have been in place for quite a long time. I also want to bring up the idea that I know is probably crystal clear in everyone's mind who's involved in this struggle, is that our universities in and of themselves are what we call wounded places. And what I mean by that is that they are places that have been wounded and they are marked by racialized exclusion and discrimination. And they are also places that continue to wound historically marginalized groups. And I would suggest that one of the ways that we approach these woundings is to think about memory work, pulling from my colleague Karen Till's work, which has discussed the idea that there is the work necessary to recovering from, addressing, and repairing these unreconciled legacies of white supremacy. And that even though we like to treat universities as sort of a microcosm that is somehow separate from the real world or the larger world, the truth is universities are extensions and parts of the real or wider material world. And the other foundational idea that I hope to help, I guess, clarify a bit more is the power that the campus landscape can have, educationally speaking, and thinking about the campus landscape as a form of curriculum. And historical sites in general are a form of hidden curriculum. We may not incorporate them formally into our teaching, but they are constantly instructing us in how to see the past, how to value the past, how to see the future, how to value that future and the possibilities. Place names don't teach like museums, like archives, like classes, but I think we can't ignore the fact that they could be very powerful as educational devices, and they are powerful in that way, and that we have to recognize the disconnect that is existing between the campus landscape values and what we formally teach about social justice. That, to me, there's a dissonance between what universities claim they are embracing in terms of social justice, inclusion, diversity, and actually the kinds of values they're communicating through their landscape. And this leads me to trying to offer you a framework for thinking about this, which I'm not confined to necessarily one campus, but I really believe that for us to have a more just representation of Black histories and identities on campus commemorative spaces, we've got to ensure that that commemorative space is reflexive, reparative, and regenerative. Reflexive in the sense that it's very thoughtfully situated within its own histories and structures and inequality. Reparative in the sense that we are actively using the landscape to redress and repair silences and wounds that have been perpetuated for a number of generations. And regenerative in the sense that we treat it as an evolving dynamic organism, and that we try our best to make it a very participatory system of change. I want to sort of suggest to you that part of, in fact, making sure that we're reflexive is really also about how we approach names in and of themselves. And one of the things I think that frustrates efforts to actually bring progressive reform to place names is that many of the people in decision-making positions, whatever else ideological and even racist attitudes they may have, really don't quite understand the power and the politics of names. And we really need to move away from very essentialist notions of the landscape and its symbols. That in fact, naming is not just a thing, it is a process of making certain identities visible or in some cases invisible. We also have to explore the campus in the context of its own history of social relations and inequalities. I can tell you from the University of Tennessee's perspective, we don't do that very well here. And this is something I think is probably pretty prevalent across many universities. I'm very happy to see that Wofford, and we're going to hear from Brandon from Furman and Clemson later, that these are happening, but in a lot of places it's not happening. We also have to document the historical political origins of our named buildings and other campus spaces. It's not enough just to simply say, well, we want to bring progressive reform. We need to have a full inventory of exactly what has been going on and what those places and who they reference. And then most importantly, we need to identify exclusions and silences and places for recovering what we call Black sense of place and a Black sense of the past. And this is at this point that I think we need to make landscape interventions, which is obviously what's going on right now here in Wofford. So I say all this to suggest to you is that this is part of a larger process of taking apart racist structures. It's not simply about, okay, let's tweak or take care of a single name. It's part of a larger body of memory work. UNC Chapel Hill has been involved in a lot of these issues, and in fact, they've done a pretty comprehensive job of going through all their named buildings and determining the history of that person being commemorated, determining the race, the gender, the particular historical period that's referenced through their building names. And in fact, students on that campus, as well as staff and faculty, were able to get Saunders Hall, the name Saunders, named after a KKK leader in North Carolina, removed, although the solution or what the Board of Governors agreed to was less than satisfactory as a replacement. Nevertheless, this is happening in other places. Another place, University of Texas. Edmund Gordon is a faculty member in Africana Studies there at Texas. He also leads on a daily basis, at least a weekly basis, a racial geography tour, which he takes takes visitors to the campus, he takes students, he takes faculty, community members, and he narrates the named buildings, he narrates the symbolic spaces on the Texas Austin campus. And this is his way of destabilizing some of those meanings that have become so entrenched. And I would suggest to you that, again, that's a good strategy in addition to pushing for a renaming. It's about constantly interpreting and reinterpreting what was once there or what's still there and what needs to change. I also think that part of this idea of being reparative is really paying close attention to how people are affected by names. And that's not something that's been, I think, widely studied in the academic literature. It's starting to pick up speed now. But in fact, I think there's still a lot to be done and said about that. And I think there's a lot of value in studying the way contemporary feelings and experiences are entangled with campus spaces and campus names, particularly from the standpoint of traditionally historically marginalized groups. And in fact, so for example, one of my colleagues at Penn State, when he was at University of Georgia, did what he called a roving focus group, where he would take students through the University of Georgia campus, and he would basically have them react to names and symbols and monuments and memorials as they encountered them on foot, and they would talk about them. And from that, he was able to glean really intense feelings and how highly charged those symbols were on that campus. I'm not sure if any university satisfactorily ever asks its students, its faculty, its staff, what do you think or feel about the spaces that you inhabit and live with, and work in? I also think that try to give some credit here to two very good colleagues at Tennessee, Gioni Lewis and Michelle Christian. One at Gioni's of psychology, Michelle's in sociology. And they have been doing the last several years a lot of work on the University of Tennessee campus in terms of asking students, not necessarily about names, but asking them about what parts and spaces on campus they represent sort of microaggressions. And in some cases, I don't think it's really a microaggression. some of these symbols and names are so offensive, they're a macroaggression. I don't even think that's a word, but I'll just go ahead and make it up for you. I think the other part of the reparative process is very policy oriented. And this, in fact, came up in my discussions and conversations with Destiny and Margaret, where we talked about policy and the fact that we probably need to repair the process of how campuses are named and symbolized. Who controls the naming process on your campus or any other campus? How are places named in a traditional sense? By whom are they named? And in fact, what's important is I think this is probably an issue that most campuses don't want to deal with, which is the fact that many campuses treat their names and the names of buildings, the name of streets, the names of rooms as assets. They're commodities to basically be sold off to donors and to alums who are wealthy. When in fact, we want to treat those names as community symbols. And we want them to do a different kind of work than what the university is doing right now. And I think we have to incorporate procedural justice into these landscape decisions. It is important to petition and to ask for and to do all the things that is being done at Wofford and is certainly being done in other universities. But I don't think we're going to have systematic change unless we have a place at the table in terms of how we name places. And to give you an idea of how really mind-blowing the inequities are, a good colleague of mine, Reuben Rose Redwood, who works up at University of Victoria in Canada, he and some research associates surveyed about 2,100 universities in the US and Canada. And he found that only 19% of those institutions they surveyed had any sort of publicly accessible naming policy. And in many cases, many of those institutions don't have a formal naming policy. It's usually a decision made by one person or a group of people, really in a locked room perhaps. And only 0.2% of those who had naming policies made any provision for public consultation. So even if they have a policy, by and large, it is not a policy open up for a more democratic participatory process. I also think that in order to think about being reparative, it's also important to combine these initiatives with naming and renaming with other larger initiatives. And I'm not going to say much about this. Brandon and his group at Furman have done, I think, outstanding work in this regard. But it's about really recognizing that naming is part of a larger assemblage of social justice work, and that it can be and should be combined with a host of museum exhibits, lecture series, other memory work, other public pedagogy. It can be combined and should be combined with campus and community justice initiatives. And I would suggest to you that, in contrast or in opposition to a lot of the opponents who suggest that, well, you remove that name and it's gone and we don't learn from it. There's a lot of very creative ways that we can link name change with other ways of telling the story and educating that could be quite helpful. I'd like to also introduce something that is relatively new. I've written about the first two processes quite a bit in my writing, but I want to really highlight some of the ideas of a colleague of mine by the name of Rebecca Sheehan. And Rebecca Sheehan has done, I think, some remarkable things in terms of applying regenerative theory and thinking from sustainability to memorials. And what she has suggested is that we want to think about memorials as not frozen in the past, but contributing to the functioning and evolution of social cultural systems, including the possibility of healing and justice. And that we want to assess the negative and positive impacts of memorialization. And she also suggests that that process should be participatory and it should be iterative. We should always be checking the landscape symbols on our campuses in a very sort of methodical, systematic way to bring justice and just representation. And that in fact, counter memorials and naming can be very constructive and should be seen as constructive interventions in an oppressive, non-dynamic system. I would suggest to you, is that right now what we have on many university campuses is a non-dynamic, oppressive system of symbols that is in need of regeneration in light of the changes happening in the country, in light of changes happening in social values. All right, so that concludes it for me.
Thank you very much, Professor Alderman. That was very helpful. And I would like to point out that our host Nadia is about to post in the chat room the petition that the Student Coalition has formed and circulated in support of renaming the buildings on Wofford campus. So if you want to check out the petition, it is now being posted in the chat room. We now turn to Professor Brandon Inabene from Furman University. Brandon was the chair and co-chair of the Task Force on Slavery and Justice at Furman, a multiracial group of alumni, faculty, and staff and students that completed its report in 2018. His interest in rhetoric of the U.S. South stems from his early research into John C. Calhoun, Richard Furman, and other pro-slavery advocates' texts. At Furman, the Seeking Abraham project was based on data he collected through institution-wide surveys, 2 years of programming and events, consultations and workshops, class projects of inventorying the campus, walking app tours of the campus in Greenville, and most recently a set of short documentary films on the history. Welcome, Dr. Inabene.
Hey everyone, thanks for having me too. And I just want to echo everything that Derek said at the beginning there, how grateful I am. I joked with the panelists before this started, but you sort of seen as a crazy man on your own campus for all the things that you're pushing and doing and all that kind of thing. And then you get to talk to another campus and maybe seem like a bit of an expert or something like that. I don't know, but I appreciate it because it does give me a opportunity to reflect and to get some distance maybe from the work that I'm embedded in here at Furman on a daily basis. So I'm gonna screen share. Just give me a second to get that going.
Great, welcome.
Thank you. Okay, so I guess I'll start with sort of the context a little bit for Furman. What I'm gonna do is just add the practical side to what all Derek said. Derek came and consulted with Furman in our process, so you guys are on the right path. Having Derek help you and give you some of that scholarly advice for how to ground this kind of work is exactly what you need to be doing. And that's what I'll mainly talk about, is how I, as a professor within the academic unit, moved some of this forward. Obviously, I'm sure Wofford already has so many offices of inclusive communities. At Furman, we have student life, wonderful personnel in student life doing this work. We have a diversity and inclusion committee, so forth and so on. And so there's already a lot of places where this could have happened. And I just, a few things administratively had happened. We got a president who, after the Mother Emanuel shooting, called for the Confederate flag to be taken down. I didn't know anything else. I mean, she doesn't have a long record of anti-racist activism or anything like that, but that was a promising sign. And then we also got a provost whose number one commitment was to hiring and retaining Black faculty. And so, and was, I will say, was blunt about doing it. Almost shockingly so for Furman, a polite place where race was something that we always wanted to do better on, but really, didn't find the language to say it and all of that. And he would walk into a meeting and say, hey, we're going to get us some Black faculty, and here's how we're going to do it. It was like, that was his game plan and that was his focus. So it was at times a bit crass. I mean, I was like, oh, I wouldn't say it that way. It sounds like you're going for hunting or something like that. And it just didn't seem right. But at the same time, I think tough language like that can shake up an institution and make things happen. So that was the broader context into which I entered. So I emailed the provost and the dean, and I said, I'd love to talk with you about joining universities studying slavery and creating just a widespread movement, for lack of a better term, on campus around acknowledging the harm that the university has done and repairing it. And in my first internet searches of what that might look like, I had come across the name of Felicia Furman. So this is one of the descendants of our namesake, Richard Furman. And she had posts on blogs around the world and so forth, kind of calling us out and saying, hey, you're a university that's the heir of this slaveholding fortune and so forth, and yet I see very little talk about that coming out of your university. What's going on here? I'm, as a family member, I'm trying to do something about this, and yet the university seems to be complacent or indifferent about this. And so I showed them that too. I said, look, I think we've got family support. I think we've got administrative leadership that can make this possible. We can join universities studying slavery. We're not the only one doing this work. I think it was mostly in Virginia at that point. There were maybe 10 schools about this work. Clemson and Carolina had just joined as we were getting ready to join. And so it seemed like there was momentum in higher ed. And so I had a meeting over lunch with them, and they said, okay, put together the proposal. What does it look like? And, I gave them the names of people. I said, I'd love the process to be fast. Because I think the number one thing that our Black students will say is that Furman often talks diversity over years and years and years, but never or hardly ever is there actual actionable, really visible signs that something's different. And so I said, I'd love it to be something where we immediately see our goals reached, but it's also long-term. There are going to be stages or sets of goals that are going to take us for the next 10 years into this new direction. It's going to come out of the academic program, but it's going to touch on all the other aspects of the university. And I'd like to have, and I even named scholars, leaders on campus and in student life and so forth that I thought would be great on such a group. They gave me the green light. They said, if you want to do all this work for free, please do. That would be great for us. And so I went forward, and we constituted the group. I sat there in that first meeting, and I pretended like I didn't. I let the provost and the dean take ownership of it. They said, we've commissioned this process. We've instituted this. And when they said, well, who's going to be the chair of it? Everyone was quiet, and everyone kind of went around, well, I'm untenured. I'm not sure this is a good idea for my career. I've got 2 children at home who need my care, and so forth and so on. And so, I pretended that it wasn't mine. And I think even to the end, some faculty and others on this committee didn't know that I was, part of the spark for getting this going. So I said, yeah, I'll chair it. That's fine. So I chaired the process. I did have a co-chair for most of the time, Teresa Cosby, who just published a wonderful piece in a local newspaper about her experience of being an African American in the South and claiming Southern identity as a Black woman. So I Google her and find that great leader on our campus that became my co-chair. From there, I just started meeting with all the different offices on campus that I thought I could get on board. Development, admissions, enrollment, financial aid, libraries, art, special collections, history. I just had probably 50 or 60 meetings with different entities on campus. And everyone was supportive, of course, at least explicitly to me. No one's going to say, no, I don't think, I don't think working to be anti-racist is a good idea. They were all at least tacitly supportive, but I had to take that step first to get some momentum going. The other component of this is that coming out of faculty member and out of academic life, I was all about the archives. And as you heard about my biography, my research is on pro-slavery rhetoric. So it was easy for me to understand how to get at, when you've got those 3 buildings named on your campus, I knew exactly how to go into Ancestry.com and newspapers and different archival sources to track down the things that would prompt people to do better. And so, for example, on our building on campus, the one that I work in, it's called Furman Hall, but it was James C. Furman Hall. And there was a plaque on the outside of the building that said that James C. Furman, when the institution was faced with trouble, he tied himself to the mast of the ship, and he said, if this ship goes down, I'll go down with her. This is a very romantic image of James C. Furman protecting the institution at all odds. And I knew from my own research that was anything but the truth in most ways, that he nearly ended the institution because of his secessionist viewpoint. He wanted all of the students to become soldiers, and most of the faculty and most of the trustees didn't think that was a good idea. They're theology students. They needed to be praying for the army and not fighting. and he was that close to shutting down the university. Same thing in Reconstruction. Had the opportunity to open up the campus and become more of a vital player in the area, and of course did not do that. If anything, went the other direction, protecting it as a bastion for white supremacy, and sowing a legacy for white supremacist rhetoric for its presidents into the 20th century. And so just to give you an example of that, here's one of the James C. Furman secession speeches from the Greenville courthouse. And so all I had to do was put this before people's eyes and say, are you okay with this? You know, the insinuation that African-American enslaved persons were lazy, thieving, marauding. He goes on to talk about women in the speech and how they're rapists and sexual molesters. You know, are you okay with that on your campus? Is that the kind of honorific space that you want on our campus? And of course, most people, again, reacted pretty viscerally and said, absolutely not. This is so greatly offensive. And thank you for for bringing this academic scholarship to our offices around campus. And so that's what I did. So as I began to get some institutional foothold, I then sort of went the research route. We were working. I did get a course release for our historian on the project, so he had some time given by the university to do real earnest research from a historical perspective. And so he wrote what's now the Seeking Abraham report. He wrote that history section. In my own classes and several of my friends on faculty, you know, Wofford, Small Lake, Furman, so it's all about leveraging your network. So I just told a few of them, hey, let's devote our classes to this. Let's figure out a way to do this. So my sociologist friends made surveys that we could use on campus to test the racial climate, the viewpoint on reconciling with past historical harms, and got data that way. 80% of students thought it was important, at least somewhat important, to deal with this and not hide it. And so that was a great sign that we could move forward from a student perspective. We got good press. So we had speakers on campus, and the Greenville papers tied us in with this community of other institutions that were doing positive work. And of course, on the Greenville News comments, you get negative attention too. I was getting nasty emails throughout this process. This is why I think it's important for white people to be doing this work in solidarity. And again, not having the experience, not knowing how visceral, how deep the wounds could be, but taking that on and saying, myself, for example, Confederate generals, actually Fort Wagner, my great-great-grandfather bombed the 54th Regiment as they came into Charleston Harbor, right? So basically the worst of the worst. So you couldn't say anything to me about, not understanding the South or not being a local, not being a Furman alum too, so not understanding this area. I get all of that. So that was why I thought it was important for me to be the hitman, the person taking the heat for some of this work. I turned my classes over to this kind of work. They went around campus, and what Derek just showed you about UNC, again, much smaller scale, about finding the sites on campus. So they found 700 sites on campus that were named for somebody. We coded them by race, gender, class, and some other things. And we, of course, found out that not a single thing on campus is named for an African-American person. Very few, I think there was maybe 7 of the 700 were named after women, and usually they were women with a man. So, the such and such and his wife building, right, of a donor, and so forth. So that was our data gathering phase. We brought in, like I said, 2 years of consultants like Derek to talk to different groups, historians, sociologists. Felicia, the Furman I was talking about, the descendant, she was working with a group called Coming to the Table. So I really highly recommend their work. I think especially in the South, it makes a lot of sense. It's about the idea that the descendants of the slaveholder and the descendants of the enslaved get together and have a conversation. And the conversation usually starts with, sort of the feelings that you would expect about, just tell me some stories. What is it like to be Black in America? Or what is it like to enjoy the privilege of being descended from the Furmans, and having your name on a building all the time, and having those conversations, but that leading eventually to reparations, right? And that being anticipated and known as a goal, not in any direct terms, but in a sort of public way. What would the politics of a reparative society look like? What would it look like for the culture in general to embrace that mindset of repairing harms? And again, that can be monetary, but it also may not be. So So we adopted that language. We specifically didn't use the word reparation just because we didn't want people to immediately go into their political silos on that. So we used the idea of reckoning with our harms as a way to avoid some of these political flashpoints. And so the report is all about presenting the historical harms and then reckoning with that past. I guess I'll stop there in terms of the kind of initial process. We basically created a list of 36 recommendations on that history for change. And we demanded that that we have a hearing with the trustees based on those demands. The time was now, it was urgent, and it needed to be done. And so we demanded that, and the administration greenlit that. We had a meeting with the trustees. They said, we'll take it from here for a little bit at least. And so one thing that was weird on our campus, and for those who know something about Furman, there's a bit of an outcry right now with Black at Furman Uni. I think we went underground. The task force ended. We handed over our work to the trustees, and we disbanded. And we were also kind of cautioned by the administration, lay low, because the trustees need some time to think about this. You've given them a lot at once. And so for them to be able to handle this, they don't need to be hitting moving targets and having a bunch of different voices saying different things. So I think to some extent they were right. It was smart of us to let them have it and let them make good decisions based on our report. It took them a year. In October, they voted to kind of generally endorse the work we had done and say that we had done great work. They did one thing that was huge, which was the Joseph Vaughn Scholarship. So $1 million a year now used specifically for African American students at Furman. And that was the hardest step. When we had questioned students about what they supported and didn't support, that was the one thing that they didn't support, was any kind of financial aid that had to do with affirmative action or race. So interestingly, I think in Good for Furman, the trustees took that on first and said, hey, if we're committed to this work, we're not even going to debate this, right? This is going to be the very first thing out the gate that we do, is to provide better financial aid. And then took a year to decide about the landscape, because they had to look at everything from, and I'd already done all the work. I checked with the donors and the contracts and development and all that, but they, as you can expect, trustees need to feel that they have a handle on that too, asking around alumni, do you have a tie to this? How offended are you going to be? What's this like for you? And doing their own listening session. So it happened. We got a positive vote in most regards to form committees. So, another bureaucratic step there, to form committees to take care of this work, but with pretty good ideas for what was going to happen. So, for example, bringing back alumni who had, I know you guys have a Toni Morrison problem at Wofford. Toni never came back to Wofford because she was like many of our African-American descendants and alumni community who just said, it's a place of white supremacy. I don't want to be there. I don't want to come to that campus. It's a negative space for me as an African-American person. And so I think in doing and announcing some of the things that we were doing, this was one of our alumni who had not been back to campus since she was one of our first Black female graduates. And when she came back to campus, that was another moment for us of a recognition that we were doing something right. One thing that's recently happened in February is that they didn't take our recommendation. It was to rename the building for a woman, because another part of our report was that this is an intersectional issue. And although there were other spaces on campus that we thought were appropriate for Black names, African-American statues, and so forth, this building we thought was perfect for Mary Judson, who's one of our feminist leaders from the past who we wanted to celebrate. Didn't take our recommendation, and instead, I think out of pretty good convenience, left it as Furman Hall. And I think some of the questions that might come later are, how do you deal with this thing that your whole institution is named for, this founder and this family that is intimately tied up with slavery? How do you make distinctions about the kind of harms that were done? And we had to do that in our report. And so that's one of the things that also becomes politicized and difficult for us to deal with, is especially when white people are at the table, how dare you make a distinction between, well, this one seems too far, but the fact that they held slaves, that's, you know, we're going to be okay with that. We're going to leave the institution's name and so forth. And I think those are calls that really, really make it hard for this kind of work. But at the same time, I think, Jim.
David, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to interrupt. This is all so fantastic and really, really interesting and really valuable to hear. But we need to move on, and like I say, hopefully there will be some time for questions. But you've been so generous, and this has been extremely helpful for us.
Thank you. I'll leave you with that last slide. That's, you know, when we are programmatically coming together now. You know, Furman has these moments where we celebrate this history, but as I just wanted to conclude, the work is not done. We have so much left to do, and you know, the way that students right now are grappling with this project, is it our voice, or is it some institutional voice that's not us? And I think people fall down all over the place on that spectrum. Thank you. Sorry about that.
Well, that's great. Thank you so much, Brandon. I really appreciate it. Okay, so now we'll turn to Mr. Gerard Green. Gerard currently serves as the Associate Director of Multicultural Programs at Clemson University. In this role, Gerard is responsible for several cultural awareness, educational, and social programs that come out of the Multicultural Center, including Cultural Heritage Months, Grill and Greet, International Festival, and Dawning of the Kente. A Midwestern transplant, Gerard has dedicated his entire higher education career to advocating for students and advancing equity on college campuses. He recognizes the importance of student coalition building and often says, "My job wouldn't exist if it weren't for student activists and leaders, so it has to end with them as well." Currently, Gerard is pursuing his doctorate in educational leadership and higher education at Clemson. Gerard, welcome. Let me go ahead and ask the question. So anything new at Clemson lately? Surely one of the most significant recent examples of renaming campus buildings to remove the presence of white supremacy in the campus landscape is Clemson's decision to rename the Honors College and to recommend to the South Carolina State Legislature that Tillman Hall be renamed. Would you please walk us briefly through the story of these renaming efforts and give us your sense of what removing memorials to white supremacy at Clemson will mean for the students you work for and with?
Yeah, definitely. And thank you for allowing me to share this space with you all. I'm excited and have been excited for this conversation. I'm joined by brilliant panelists, and I feel a little bit inadequate with some imposter syndrome being on this platform with you all, but I'm glad to be here, and you know, I'll try to be as concise as possible. But I really wanted to start with kind of the historical context, just a brief overview of where we've been as a university, and really using that to lead into where we are currently. Before I start, I want to name that I'm not an expert, and I recognize that there are many individuals who have been intimately involved and have been involved for much longer than myself in these projects and initiatives. I also want to express my gratitude for the student activists that made these movements and conversations possible at Clemson, and all the faculty and staff members who supported students in these efforts. I particularly want to call attention to Dr. Rhonda Thomas and her Call My Name project, which really paved the way for a lot of this information to be— I'm not sure I understand. Sorry, that was Siri. Who particularly gave space for these conversations to happen and to really put a spotlight on these histories. And so I really wanted to thank Dr. Rhonda Thomas for her efforts. So before the land was seized, before the land that Clemson rests upon was seized through broken treaties and colonization from European settler colonialists, the land was inhabited and stewarded by Cherokee Indians and had been for centuries. In particular, it was the town of Seneca, which was situated on the east bank of the Kiwi River. And eventually those individuals were forcibly removed. Their town was burned. And eventually, you know, John C. Calhoun became landowner in 1836. After he died in 1850, his wife became the owner of the land until about 1866. And then the land was left to her daughter, Anna, who eventually married Thomas Green Clemson in 1838. So Anna willed her shares to Thomas Green Clemson, and one of her stipulations around that was that he created a will upon his death. And in Thomas Green Clemson's will, he donated his shares of Fort Hill Plantation and about $80,000 to the creation of Clemson University as an agricultural college. Thomas, and specifically to note in Thomas Green Clemson's will that still impacts us today and continues that legacy is the Board of Trustees makeup. So in his will, he identified or he shared that the Board of Trustees should include no more than 6 members appointed by the state legislature, and then the other 7, for a total of 13, were able to choose their successors. So thinking about the majority of the Board of Trustees that we have now are succeeded through, they have lifetime membership and they get to choose the folks who come after them, which is important for some of these decisions historically as well as more recently as well. And so, you know, African Americans were a vital source and a vital force in the operation and economy of Fort Hill Plantation, the home of John C. Calhoun, really between 1825 and 1850 when he died. Andrew Pickens and Margaret Green Clemson from about 1851 to 1871. And then you have Thomas Green Clemson and Anna Clemson from about 1872 to 1888 when Clemson was founded and when Thomas Green eventually passed away. Calhoun was to maintain a legal and political strategy to maintain slavery and enslave folks on his plantation. It's shared that he probably had upwards of 130 to 150 enslaved Africans on his plantation. We have other buildings like Strom Thurmond, and Strom Thurmond was notorious for filibustering the Civil Rights Act, was very much a proponent against civil rights for Black people. You have Benjamin Pitchfork Tillman, who openly supported white supremacy and violence through lynching against Black people. And so, you know, all of these names and kind of these names have risen to the forefront of our discourse at Clemson. It's important to understand some of that historical background of how, you know, these folks are remembered versus some of the actions that they actually took and the role that Clemson has in maintaining their legacies through miseducation and memorializing these individuals and idolizing these individuals. And so Tillman Hall was initially constructed in 1893 by convict laborers who were predominantly Black, as specified by, you know, the university. And Tillman Hall was eventually renamed in 1946 to honor Benjamin Tillman. So it was initially called Main Building, and the name was changed in 1946 to honor Benjamin Tillman. Another building on campus, or another space on campus that came into prominence was our Calhoun Honors College, Clemson Calhoun Honors College, which was created in 1962. You know, it was initially formed in 1961, created and established in 1962, and speculation dates the naming of Calhoun back to the 1980s as a way to align Clemson's college with the prestige of Yale's Calhoun College that they had at the time, which was eventually changed in the 21st century. You know, in a 1999 Board of Trustees meeting, even there was a call to change the name of Calhoun College to Calhoun Honors College, but the meeting went into executive session, so there aren't more notes that can be dated back to that. But also in the 90s, you see student activism calls for name changes starting even back then. And I'm sure that they happened before then as well, but we can look back to the 1990s for some of those name changes. Fast forward a few years to more contemporary history, you know, there's activism that sparked up on Clemson's campus related to Black Lives Matter with the killing of Trayvon Martin, Michael Brown, and others. And through this activism, there was really a focus on a national landscape, which then turned inward towards Clemson. And that's when a group of students issued a list of demands to the university And among those demands was the call to change the name of Tillman Hall back to Main Building or Old Main, which is how it's commonly referred to. So in 2015, the Board of Trustees refused to change the name of Tillman after Faculty Senate and GSG, our graduate student government, approved resolutions supporting the name change. Really, throughout that time, there's been a narrative of, not changing the name because it was a symbolic gesture and that wasn't the priority. Their argument with that was that there are more pressing needs that the university should attend to rather than changing names of buildings and academic programs. And so, the movement really came to a climax when bananas were posted on an African American heritage sign outside of the plantation house that still is situated on campus, which launched a 9-day psych sit-in that students participated in. During the psych sit-in on day 2, 5 students were arrested for trespassing. And, there was a lot of work and activism and meetings that were happening at that time. And again, students were looking to amplify the demands that had already been made, including the naming of Tillman Hall back to Old Main or Main Building, or changing the name to something that didn't represent white supremacy. And so after the psych sit-in, a number of changes occurred, including the telling of racist history of Ben Tillman. So they included some language outside of Old Main or Tillman Hall at Clemson, but the renaming fell to the legislature through the Heritage Act, which there's some activism happening right now between students across the state to repeal the Heritage Act. And so the renaming activism was revitalized in around 2018, 2019, with students and other faculty who had been part of the movement before, and other students who were passionate about these changes. And so, this happened, but then they were shot down again. They tried to get on a board meeting that October, and their request wasn't fulfilled. And so some of that movement died down until June 2020, after the killing of George Floyd and other black people through rampant police violence. And so students who were connected to some of the initial movement building the year prior rebanded, and other voices were brought in, and they developed a petition to rename the Calhoun Honors College. That was their primary focus because of the acknowledgement of the Heritage Act and how Tillman Hall is protected. And so they received, one of the differences in this movement was that they received sponsorship from DeAndre Hawkins, who's the former Clemson football player and a current NFL player, and also Deshaun Watson, who is also a former football player, kind of Clemson's golden child, if you will, who is also a current NFL player, endorsed Deshaun Watson and endorsed the movement as well. And Clemson football players also staged a protest to call out these injustices shortly after that happened as well. But a lot of what, aside from that, a lot of what sparked this movement and the changing of these names was another petition that students had organized that received over 20,000 signatures in a week. And so from a lot of the uprising that occurred and the conversations and the unrest that was occurring, the Board of Trustees called a special meeting, which happened on Friday, June 12th. And at that meeting, there was a decision made to, and it was shared as per the recommendation from the provost and the special task force that he assembled for the Honors College. The recommendation was made to officially change the name of the Calhoun Honors College to the Clemson Honors College, and to seek permission from the General Assembly to change the name of Tillman back to Main Building, commonly referred to as Old Main. And so effective immediately, the naming of the Honors College shifted. They had in their own internal documents and records had already started doing some of that name changing, but they, as a unit, weren't able to officially change the name. And so that was eventually approved by the Board of Trustees. And right now, I think our university is continuing to advocate, but navigating that fine line of maintaining political capital that they have with the Board of Trustees to continue to advocate for the name change related to Tillman Hall. And so from this, and since then, the students who are involved with the Reclaim and Rename movement with the Honors College have more so supported other demands and other forms of activism that have sparked since this, because in large part because of the makeup of the group, the Reclaim and Rename group, which was primarily white students, faculty, and staff, with a few students of color, but really no Black student representation. And this change also prompted investigation into other buildings on campus. So Tillman Place, which is a local hotel, is advocating to change its name. Calhoun Court's residence halls was investigated, but was found that it was named after a different Calhoun. Clemson moved to tell the complete history beyond what's commonly shared to first-year students and other students on campus has become a priority. Dr. Rhonda Thomas continues her Call My Name project, including her Call My Name tours that she hosts around campus and the Call My Name exhibition that she hosted this year. And then, reconciling, as was shared before by Brandon, really reconciling this idea that the very name of Tillman is steeped in whiteness and white supremacy. I mean, not Tillman, but Clemson is steeped in whiteness and white supremacy. So how do you reconcile changing the names of these buildings, but still, doing work at an institution whose name is problematic in a county named after Andrew Pickens, who enslaved Black people as well. And so it runs really deep. And we could talk about this all day, but in thinking about what this means, students I work with wake up every day knowing that they'll have to walk by Fort Hill Plantation House, which is right in the middle of campus, or have class in Tillman Hall, which represents white supremacy. It's one thing to be reminded of these symbols of racism, white supremacy daily, and it's another to recognize that students have been ostracized, gaslit, arrested, and shut down advocating for these changes. In the moments following the name change, a lot of credit was given to university administration, our board of trustees, and our Clemson football team for their courage, leadership, and activism. However, no credit was given to the students who organized the petition that had over 20,000 signatures, who leveraged statewide activism through repealing the Heritage Act and prompted the need for this change in the first place. Students acknowledge that this is a piece of a larger puzzle, and many groups around campus, alumni, graduate students, undergraduate students, have issued demands to the administration calling for increased support and infrastructure around diversity and inclusion. And many students from the site sit-in are frustrated that students have to be arrested, and they were on the steps for 9 days and haven't received an apology from the Board of Trustees or from university administration. So now there are, I guess, again, calls to increase Black student enrollment, hire and retain Black faculty and staff on campus, address DEI issues in the curriculum, provide more funding for diversity programming, and other changes. And now we're seeing, I think, more digital activism through pages like Black at Furman, Black at Wofford, Black and Brown at Clemson, LGBTQ at Clemson, and even my office, the Multicultural Center at Clemson, we've been getting a lot of requests for workshops, trainings, and support for DEI efforts for our colleagues across campus. And so, this work is ongoing, and it's challenging, and it's easy to wait out the life cycle of our students because after 4 years, most likely they're going to be leaving. And so we really are thinking about how do we keep folks engaged in the conversation, because it's not enough to be active and facilitate change in the interim. It's popular right now, it's trendy right now to talk about anti-racism and white supremacy and say, we have this plan of how we're going to address these issues. What's going to be the true test is a year from now, what are our institutions going to be doing to keep this conversation happening? And, you know, we have a big spotlight on the university and how they manage the conversation around the repealing of the Heritage Act, and also the subsequent renaming of other buildings on campus. And not only renaming them to other white men who were board of trustees members or former college presidents, but to think about who else has made an impact on campus and provided capital, whether even if that's not financial capital, to the university that we should be honoring and recognizing to transform our future. So I'll stop there. I know that I probably went a little bit over, but that's a little bit of what the Clemson landscape looks like. And, you know, there's a lot more to it and a lot more history, and folks at Clemson have documented this history well if folks are interested in learning more. So that's kind of the current landscape. And again, we acknowledge, similarly as other panelists have said, that this work is continuous and ongoing, and we're going to continue to fight for social change and reform at the university.
Terrific, Gerard. Thank you so much. And thank you to all of our panelists today for such stimulating and important and very, very thoughtful answers. Please feel free to stay online to participate in one of our breakout discussion sessions. You'll have up to about 22 minutes to debrief and discuss the session. After your session, one of the team members will dismiss you from that session. I do want to recognize the members of the Anti-Racism Action Team for their efforts in this week in this work. Dean Taifa Alexander, Dr. Rhiannon Liebrick, Dr. Camille Bethay, Dr. Kim Rostan, Dr. Kimberly Hall, Dr. Tasha Smith-Tyus, Professor Jessica Scott-Felder, Ms. Tiara Woney, Mr. James Stukes, and our excellent hostess, Ms. Nadia Glover. And I would especially like to recognize Ms. Destiny Shippey, and the work of the Wofford Anti-Racism Coalition, a student-organized, student-run activist group whose emotional and intellectual labor has been immense in their efforts to help bring justice to Wofford. As colleagues, we have committed to hosting these virtual series throughout the summer and look forward to seeing you all again soon. This concludes the panel and the question and answer portion of our program. If you just stay tuned, you'll be placed into a discussion group. Thank you.